Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Decode podcast. And today's guest is Bill Harmer. Bill has been in the cyber game for over 30 years. He has a distinguished career, which I'm sure he'll discuss in a second. But most recently, he is the operating partner and CISO at Craft Ventures. And finally, Bill, we managed to make it after a couple of delays, reschedules, but I'm glad you're here. How are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
Excellent, thank you. And then, so we traditionally, with our guests, we have a kind of brief overview of who they are and their career. So over to you, Bill.
Sure. All right, I'm going to give you the long version, the short version of the long version. I started my career, this is an accident. Okay, so this is my backup career. My original career, the plan was all of this. I was going to do practical special effects in movies. That's the high school thing that I wanted to do. And I'd been doing it since middle school. But it's not an easy thing back in the 80s to get into that. There wasn't a lot of stuff in Toronto. You had to basically fly to LA and start your career there. And my parents were kind of psychotic about that. And they're like, that's not happening. So my dad got me a backup career. He said, I'll get you a career. I'll get you something that pays the bills. I started working in a data center in 88 as tape monkey. I was literally loading cartridges on the midnight shift. And you know, the bills came in, the bills got bigger, the dream sort of gets put behind you and you continue on. And, you know, 7 years later, I was still working at, where was I? Sony of Canada. And I'd been through a whole bunch of stuff there. You know, I'd been doing, retail support for the retail point of sale systems. I'd done, mainframe operator, we called them microsystems back then. They're called PCs today. And we were running through this SAP R3 installation, and the CIO wanted it to be the fastest installation of SAP R3 in Canada. It's not exactly what I would consider the best target for an SAP installation, but we were headed for it. And every night, every day, they would sit in the war room and work out different process, procedures, changes, all that stuff. And every night we would print off the new workbooks for them, and we were killing trees. Like, we were just mowing them down with the amount of printing we were doing. And I made this comment to the manager there that said, why don't we just build an internal website? Because I was doing contract work for the Canadian government on the side, hand coding HTML, because I knew the reveal codes from WordPerfect. A little bit of trivia there. That's where HTML came from, WordPerfect. It was the reveal codes. So I knew how to do that. And I said, why don't we just build this web page, and then we'll update that every day. And then at the end of it, we'll print off one set of books and we'll stop killing trees. And the answer that I got changed my life, because he said, why do you want to screw around with that internet crap? It's a fad. It'll be gone next year. So I quit the next week. I turned in my resignation and I joined a porn company because they were the only ones making any money that could pay anybody on the internet in 97. I spent like 18 months to the day there. I said I would join in my head, I said, I'm going to join this company for like 12 to 18 months to try and learn some of this new technology. And that's like, we were attacked religiously. Like, there was no security options back then. You didn't buy CNAPs or identity solutions. You figured it out and you coded it. And that's what I started doing. I loved it. It was fantastic. I was fascinated watching people break into stuff. Going back through the logs and figuring out how they did it and setting up honey traps so we could capture how they did it and then defend against it. And it started going from there. I went from there into, and that was a company, by the way, that was like making 20 million a year ARR in 97, pure internet business. And we were doing live broadcasting back then. So things that, OnlyFans today, we were running that back in 97. And then I ended up going to a company in Toronto called DocSpace that did secure file services and delivery, because they wanted somebody that could handle large internet connections, high speed, reliable, and securely. And, at Apollo, I was running dual DS3s. And I always find this hilarious to talk about today because, you've got a phone that's probably doing gig speeds off your phone. But back then I had dual DS3s, that's 90 megabits a second. And I was pushing 75 megabits a second sustained to the internet, which made me the largest customer of Bell Canada, even ahead of their entire home internet population. So they brought me over to this company called DocSpace, and we built what was effectively now Box, Dropbox, Google Drive. We built that, just pure browser access to file service, storage delivery in 99. Sold it in 2000 to Critical Path. Went through a bunch of stuff at Critical Path. That place was amazingly insane. Like we used to say we were cutting edge, and we did everything early, including apparently accounting practices, because we were doing Enron before Enron. Five people arrested, 2 put in jail. But we rebuilt the company. We shed all the extra weight. We closed down services. We sold stuff off. And it's amazing. We sold DocSpace to 2 cows in Canada. And they must have had the patents when they bought the technology, and they must have had those patents, but I never saw a single patent lawsuit against Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, any of them. And those patents, as far as I know, lasted until 2013, 2014, something like that.
Wow.
But yeah, so I was there, and then after the grind, I thought I need a change, because the internet business, the startup world is a grind. Like if you're going to get into startups, be prepared to grind it out every day, all day, 24/7, 365. There is no break when you're in a startup. And so I thought, I need to go somewhere where budgets are planned and I'm not having to deal with all that crap. I went to Manulife Financial. I went straight to the other side of the world on this thing. Only because they were building a lot of stuff, or they wanted to build a lot of stuff internally that was very SaaS based. And that I was coming out of the SaaS world. And this is before, cloud services were being commonplace and stuff like that. But you enter a world of politics, like suit and tie, clean shaven. Like there were weird rules that today just I guess wouldn't fly, but back then it's just the way it was. And I spent 3 years there, and I learned the politics of the place. I learned some really good budgeting, some really good interesting personal development lessons, including how to get laid off. Because I got called into an office one day to talk about a project. Boss goes, "We're not talking about the project. There's your paperwork. You're out of here." I'm like, what? I thought I was doing a great job. What was his name? John Mather was the CIO at the time. And that guy came, like when he was hired into companies, he came with effectively an insurance policy and a supply of body bags. Because he was not there to make friends. He was there to change companies and at scale. And he outsourced like 400 IT people, blew the whole organization out. He was there during the John Hancock acquisition. So he packaged me out, and I did what you're supposed to do. Do not sign anything the day they tell you. Just take the paperwork, walk away. So I took the paperwork, went home, told my wife. She cried. We'd just bought a house. It was horrible. Went back in the next morning full of just piss and vinegar. I was mad, and stormed into John's office. I'm like, why? What? And he goes, "Oh, I did that." I'm like, "Yeah, I know you did it. Why?" He goes, "Look at yourself. You're 30 pounds overweight. You're working 12 hours a day. You're going to have a heart attack and die at your desk, and nobody here is going to care. They'll replace you on Monday." He said, "Go back to those startups that you love." And I was like, wow. There was just this realization that he was absolutely right. And for a guy that had the worst reputation in the world from people, he was doing me a favor. Like he was taking care of me. So I did. I said I was going to take 6 months off. I lasted 3 because I just can't sit still. But I took boxing. I took up boxing, dropped 30 pounds, got in shape. Got a contract to get back into just sort of the swing of things to sort of feel it out. And during my time at Manulife, I had done an audit of a little startup in Silicon Valley called SuccessFactors in 2005. And when I audited them, I showed up on site at their headquarters, and half people are like, "Oh, it's a boondoggle. He just wants to go to California." The CIO there, Randy Womack, fantastic guy, still one of my best friends to this day now. As I was leaving, he said, I got to ask you a question. Why was the data center not good enough for you? Like, why couldn't you just audit the data center and be done with it? I said, well, because first off, the data center is not yours. it's Equinix or wherever they were hosting. I said, what I want to see is I want to come to your office and I want to see how you treat your data, how you treat your people, how you handle your offices, because that'll tell me how you're going to handle mine. And he sort of smiled, as I was leaving. I said, if you ever need somebody to run security, call me. And it was an off the cuff remark. And, 2 years later, I get this phone call going, so we need a head of security. Are you interested? And I'm like, yeah. Flew down, did the interviews, did 13 interviews in a day because they like to do the roundtable interviews, and had a job offer walking out the door that night. And it was a fantastic ride, like back to the grind. Like it was, Success Factors was a grind, but it was fantastic. I love that stuff. Came on in 2007. We laid off hundreds of people in 2008 because the recession was hitting. That's a brutal thing to have to do, to lay off your friends, your colleagues, people that you've worked with so hard. But we had no choice. It was do that or bury the company. So we rolled it. We said, I think that Lars actually came out and said he would hire back anybody that wanted to come back if, the economy changed, and it did. We turned the company, kept it going, sold it to SAP for 3.6 billion or 3.4 billion. And that was after the IPO. And it was a phenomenal run there, and I got to learn so much. That's where I sort of, if you look at my career, where I slide from security into privacy, and that fundamentally changed how I approach things too. Because to me, security is not a state; it's not an objective. You don't try to become secure. Security are tools; they're a collection of tools that you utilize, and you're trying to create privacy. And a lot of us think privacy is PII, it's our personal information, and it is, that's part of it. But privacy is the dissemination, the correct and appropriate dissemination of information at the correct time to the correct person for the correct purpose. That's what privacy is. And the security tools allow us to do that. We stop the bad people looking at stuff that they shouldn't, and we let the good people look at the stuff they should. So I ended up with a very, very, I think, deep lesson in German data privacy, because we were selling to companies like Siemens and Deutsche Bank and Bosch. And again, just took what I could learn from that and see where it would go. The problem with me is I don't like the big companies. I'm not a good big company employee because I like to break stuff. I break it or I fix it. Give me something to build or fix. I'm happy. Turning a handle, it's not me. So, I left SAP in 2014, went over to Good Data. I was there for about a year. Good product. It was stalled, and it was in a position that I didn't see the company going where they wanted to go. They wanted to go to IPO, and it was an acquisition at best. And I got this phone call from a former sales guy that says, hey, do you want to join Zscaler? And I'm like, load balancing company? No. And he goes, no, that's NetScaler. I'm like, well, what's a Zscaler then? And he goes, you need to talk to Michael Sutton. I'm like, all right, I'll talk to anybody. And I sat down and talked to Michael Sutton, who was the CISO at Zscaler, and I was just blown away. What they were planning on doing, or what they were actually doing in some cases, was amazing. And one of the things they did with their interview process was you had to do two presentations. One is, who is Bill Harmer? So I did that presentation. And the other is, where do you see the internet in, I think it was like 18 to 24 months? And I had this idea from the privacy world that I had formulated back when I was at SAP, and I actually tried to get SAP to acquire Adelom early days, couldn't get their head around it. To create privacy pods that were distributed throughout the world with local encryption keys. So that way, under the US government, we could do large data centers or in whichever location we wanted, but everything would be encrypted. And so I took this whole concept that I was thinking of, and I put that into the presentation, and Patrick Foxhoven looked at it and went, how'd you get my presentation? I was like, what? He goes, let me show you something. He showed me ZPA, which was Zscaler Private Access. And it was nice. It was like the same concept. It was different. They were doing for VPN access. I was doing it for encrypted data. But it was so in line. And I just knew that was a place I had to start. I had to work at. I had to go there. Jay was a is a visionary. Like the way he built that company, the way he knew that he had to let his engineers build it correctly from the ground up. was important. So I was there for 5 years preaching change, transformational change, right? We just needed people to stop building stacks and start building processes around access. And that was a great run. Had a great time. Went over to SecureAuth for a couple of years. I ended up effectively, I was the CIO as well, because I was running DevOps, I was running IT, audit, compliance, security, product security. It was the grind again, right? It was 2 years through the pandemic. I think I was running 6 departments. And they were in the process of, they had just laid off their CEO, general counsel, CRO, a bunch of other people. They were going to reimage the company. And I was sitting in my office. I had moved to Austin. I was living out on Lake Travis, and I was sitting there with a cup of coffee at like 4:30 in the morning. And I looked at my bag because I was supposed to fly to Irvine, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. My mental health will not take this anymore. Wrote a letter of cancel my flight, car, hotel, wrote a letter of resignation, and thought I'll figure this out. And my wife came down like at 7:30 and saw the light on. She's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I quit. I can't do this." And she goes, "Thank God, because it was killing you." And I was like, "We'll figure it out. You know, we're in a good position, so let's figure it out." And we thought, it's the pandemic's opening up. We're like, Texas is, Texas people are lovely people, loved living there. But we're city people. We were living out on the lake. So we thought, let's sell the house, move back to California. Like literally all of this in 2.5 weeks or something. I quit my job. We sell the house. We literally pack up the car and drive to California like the Beverly Hillbillies, and get an Airbnb in Noe Valley and go, all right, we'll figure it out. And ended up I had been doing some consulting work with Kraft, and Kraft, they heard I was available, and they're like, "Do you want to come on full time?" I'm like, "Yeah, give me 6 months. Can we do this in the summer?" And they're like, "Absolutely, that's perfect timing for us as well." And I've been with Kraft for 2.5 years doing vCISO services for my portfolio company. So using the knowledge and the experience I've gained over 30 years in the business. I do technical due diligence on new investments, which is fantastic because I get to see all the new stuff coming out long before people. I see stealth companies and I'm just blown away by. And then in-house CISO work for David Sachs, Jeff Fleur, and Kraft in general. And it allows me to just, I think, really enjoy what I do because I can help companies out when they need help. But I don't have to deal with the stress of trying to deliver an audit or, the customer contracts matching up to the security addendum that don't line up anymore. So there you go. That was a bit of a long version of the long version, but that's 30 years. I like it.
Yeah, well, I did say you've been around for a while. So, and a couple of things that you'd mentioned there, like that resonated with me is like I've never had to go through a round of layoffs,
Yeah.
or laid anyone off under me. And how do you mentally prepare for that, and how do you kind of cope with that? Because obviously a lot of these people you would have grown close with, probably some friends. Again, the bigger objective would have been survival of the company, probably. But I'm interested just to get your insight on that.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is, and this is it sounds brutally harsh, and it is, but you're doing this not just for the company, but for their benefit as well. You cut access off early. You prepare that, and so what we did was, you have to disassociate yourself from it a little bit. You can't, because these are not my decisions at this point, right? The decisions have been made. HR and all the department heads have gotten together and figured out how they're going to make the new budgets work and what we can survive. And so you're really looking at this as a task, as a process. This is just a process, at least from my perspective as security. Jeremy Bauer was there as the head of IT, and he was handling it from that. So the two of us literally locked ourselves in a room with our phones, and we would sit there, and we had the process laid out very clear. It happens like this. As soon as a conversation was being started, so for instance, if I was your manager and I was calling Leo in to have a chat with you, I would text me or Jeremy. So it would actually, I believe it went to Jeremy first. And so the text would come in, he would get it, and he would give me the name, and we would start locking accounts out. And the reason you have to do that, yes, it protects the company from people doing stuff, but people, when they're being laid off, become emotional. As somebody who has been through this, you are brutally raw and emotional, and you are not thinking straight. You will do stuff that you don't mean to do, don't want to do. It will happen. And that can be hugely detrimental to your career, your future. You can be sued. And this is why I say, if you lay somebody off, you walk them out the door. They do not go back to their desk. They do not touch anything. Like, at best, they're going back escorted to pick up a briefcase, a purse, a backpack, a jacket, a personal item like that. They are not touching company property in any way. And you walk them out, and every account they have is locked out until you can let everybody calm down, let the temperature come down on this. And we had to do that over 300 times. It was mentally, I don't think there is anything you can do to prepare for it, because I've laid people off, and it is not a pleasant time. Sometimes it's better for them. Sometimes it's better for the company. Sometimes it just is what it is, kind of thing. But when you come out of that room, and we sat there in that room, because the other thing is, if you're going to do a RIF at this kind of scale, you do not do this piece by piece. David Sachs said it early in 20, I think it was late in 21, but early in the process, where he was saying, cut deep, cut fast. Because if you don't, you got to do it multiple times. Instead of, if we hadn't laid off 50 odd % of the company or whatever it was, if we'd said, we'll do 25 and see how it goes, guaranteed in 2 months, you're doing another 40% just to try and catch up for the 25 that you missed. So you just sit there, you do it, and then you leave, and you leave everything behind. And, everything, I left my computer, everything. The only thing I took with me was my phone for an emergency if something happened. And then you go out and you drink a little bit too much that night, and you try to let it go. Like, you just find a coping mechanism, right? You find something that can just sort of shed it and walk away from it. Don't do it on a Friday, because that gives you a weekend of problems where everybody's walked away. So you do it on a Tuesday, do it on a Wednesday. You got a couple of days where people are still in the office that can deal with any of the fallout from what's happening. But yeah, it's, I did that 16 years ago, and I can still feel it. I can still see it. I can still see the room. I can still see Jeremy sitting across from me. And the just, like, you're not even chatting about anything. There's just you just sit in silence and go through it.
And it's one of those things when it comes to business, and, whether you're issuing those orders or you're on the other end of it, equally it's painful. But one of the other items that resonated with me was you mentioned the kind of transitioning from security into privacy side. And one thing I've always wondered is, why do you think security and privacy clash? Like, sometimes teams have kind of competing issues. I'm interested to get your insight on that.
The clash that you would have is usually because it's competing rules, right? Security, and this is, I don't know if I'm popular for saying this or people think I'm mental, but I honestly think that the title of CISO, the Chief Security Officer, should go away, because that focuses on this concept of security, and there is so much more to what needs to be done. So we're not just chasing our tails on this. It should be a Chief Risk Officer, and if you have a risk officer, then you're looking at what is at risk, right? What can the company survive? You could be looking, let's use GE. I use GE as an example all the time because they're such an idea. They're an IP company, right? They work up big, brilliant ideas. And I remember being told that I believe it was the CTO at the time, or CIO at the time, was talking to the board and said, what's the most important asset to this company? And instantly, intellectual property was the answer. No arguments, no hesitation. And then he followed it up with, well, which part of it? Like, what? And somebody said all of it. And he goes, okay, so we should then treat the washing machine division the same way we treat the jet engines. And that's the realization right there. Jet engines are a multi-trillion-dollar, decades-long project that are the lifeblood of the company. Washing machines are annually revamped based on color and a couple of features and really don't differentiate from somebody else. So if you lose the intellectual property. Somebody steals the plans for your next year washing machine. Yeah, it's going to hurt. Maybe it's a $20-50 million hit, but it is not a $1 trillion problem. And that's the kind of thing that you have to think about, because if you base this on risk, then privacy and security don't clash. They come together, because privacy is the proper implementation of security tools, and risk achieve the privacy goal. And I think that's where you need to start looking at it. That's why I've always loved it when I own privacy and security and IT. I hate owning IT, I really do. But if I own IT, security, and privacy, my privacies are my goals. I'm now basing this on risk. What is the risk of something happening to these? And then I can implement the tools, and then I can make IT just implement my tools as I see fit. And it's I think, a lot cleaner. And I think we need to see that move to risk, because once you start talking about risk as well, boards understand risk. That is a very common language that they understand, and you can put it in perspectives for them. So you're not in there saying, we've got 7,500 machines and 42% of them were patched and we had a compromise over here. Who cares if you were compromised? Does it affect the company? Right? Okay, it does affect the company. Now, how? What is the risk? Will we survive it? Yes, we'll survive it. What's the impact? It's a 3% on our top line. Okay, that's not good, but what would it take to stop that? We're going to have to implement some solutions, and they're going to cost, 1% of our budget increase. For a 1% budget increase to protect 3% of the top line, easy. Boards make those decisions all the time. That's the same as making a marketing decision to enter a new market or a new area or a new territory, make a fundamental upgrade to the offering. That's easy. That makes sense. And that allows them to use their business acumen to make the right risk decision for the company. And then you're interpreting the security privacy implications of what that risk is.
Let's talk about something that might be keeping you awake at night. Cybersecurity. According to Vanta's latest State of Trust report, it's the #1 concern for UK businesses. That's where Vanta comes in. Whether you're a startup, growing fast, or already established, Vanta can help you get ISO 27001 certified and more without the headaches. Vanta allows your company to centralize security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risks to help your team not only get compliant, but stay compliant. Stop stressing over cybersecurity and start focusing on growing your business in 2025. Check out Vanta and let us handle the tough stuff. Head to vanta.com/decloak to learn more. Because when it comes to your business, it's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about keeping everything secure. Thanks. I like that. It's such a unique viewpoint, and mostly everyone that I've spoken to who's either US based, there's such a central focus in risk management, and it makes sense because it's the common language that the board understand. So yeah, I like that different slant. And by the time this episode drops, I'll probably be converted into Chief Risk Officer. So thanks, Bill.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Let me know how it goes, because I want to see if I just send you down a path.
I know. And then moving on to the challenges you've been faced with in your career. Again, they can be professional or personal. Talk me through some of them and how you've overcome them. Yeah.
I say change is simply an act of survival. That is it. In fact, I spent 5 years talking that track line to people about this. The challenges are it's interesting. You have to take risks, right? So there are people that I came up in the industry with that are back in Toronto. They chose not to make moves, physical moves. I mean, to the US. I chose to make that move because I saw opportunity there, and that was important to me. But you have to accept that you're cutting ties with family and friends to a certain degree, because you live 3 hours difference and thousands of miles away. You run into obstacles everywhere, right? John Mather, for instance, right? That man could have been an obstacle. He could have been, but what you have to do is you have to look at the obstacle and understand how can you use the obstacle to your advantage and help, right? Maybe it's not going to be beneficial, but you will definitely make it non-deterrent, right? And this is risk management. You just look at your career as risk management. You look at those challenges. So when I went to Manulife, at the time, I think I had a goatee and 3 earrings. That is not flying at Manulife, right? Okay, so the earrings come out, the face gets shaved, no big deals. You are definitely not showing up to meetings with short sleeve shirts on. But again, those are challenges that you look at, you understand, you decide, can I accept them personally, right? And can I make those changes? And am I compromising myself in any way? And if not, continue on down the path. When I stared down the barrel of that manager telling me the internet was a fad, that was an easy one. Like that, I realized I would die there. Like I could have a long career actually I couldn't, because Sony of Canada, I don't think exists anymore. I think they rolled it into Sony US. But I could have worked there for 20 odd years, but I would not be anywhere near where I am today. So the challenges that are out there, I think you need to look at, again, what can you survive? What can you as a person? And this is the same thing I say that you tell your companies. What can I survive if it goes wrong, right? So maybe it's, in this particular case, it's not a cyber attack. It's a risk to, when I quit my job with nothing behind me. I knew I could survive. I had made sure that, and I tell CISOs nowadays, have a year's expenses in the bank, only because as a CISO, you will be asked sooner or later, I believe, to compromise yourself in some way. It can be very simple, where you're just uncomfortable with the decision being made, and you can become comfortable with it and you can try and learn how it goes. Or it might be something where you're like, no, we don't sell that product, and I'm not going to say we do so that you can sign this contract. Like the last thing you want to end up with is that on your record and going into court. Like, I mean, ask Joe Sullivan. You make choices and you pay the price on the back end. And I feel so sorry for the guy, and I feel sorry for his family and his daughters. Like that's just not something I want my family to be put through. So I am willing to walk away. And I think as security people become risk people, you have to be even more so willing to walk away.
I like that. And I think it's about taking that step and the bravery, as someone who knows a few people that went through a process, and these things can hit you, out of the blue, and then maybe they don't have any finances or they haven't planned that far ahead. And I think we always walk a tightrope, as a CISO, and anything can happen to destabilize us. But
for sure.
Yeah.
And it might not be your fault. Look at Tim Brown, right? Literally, I cannot see how that what's happening is that guy's fault. And he's literally named as a personal defendant in a lawsuit by the SEC. Makes no sense.
Again, I think when these types of, I don't know, we'll call it drama, happens, you just don't know who certain people are connected to as well. And it kind of, that political element comes in. And, again, maybe if I get some people from these companies on the podcast, then maybe they can go into maybe some vagueness around it. But like a lot of these companies, they probably don't have security as a priority, even though they're a security company.
Yep.
They don't do patching and everything else, and that catches up. But anyway,
and I think if you look at it as a whole, I think security is CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if you really look at it based on the marketing, the actions, the choices, 99% of what we do today, or what security people are doing today, is the C part. Confidentiality. There's less done on integrity, and availability just doesn't seem to be there anymore, because they're thinking, well, I got backups, I'm good, right? And then you look at what happened with CrowdStrike. Like, nobody there, like even CrowdStrike, that's a real interesting one when you think about it, because I immediately went, how could you not test your stuff before you sent it out, and you brick machines? Then I found out that it was a unique combination of whatever software was on there on the target machine, and that was only 8.5% of their entire user population. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, like I can see making the decision. I'm not going to test for the 8.5%. I'm going to test for the 90+%. Make sure I'm good with 90% of my companies. But that's also terrifying as well. If that had happened on a flip side to the 90%, because 8.5 million machines cost $45 billion in damages. I mean, as a CISO, if every endpoint has one EDR on it, is that a risk? Where's my availability if that EDR goes down, right? Why am I not running dual EDRs like CrowdStrike and Sentinel-1 at the same time with a single interface? And anybody out there that wants to build that interface, I think you're going to win the prize if you do.
Yeah. I actually thought you were going to give me a solid calculation there on the 90%. And I was like, but if anyone can come up with that calculation,
I'm going to have to do the math on that.
I'll send them some free merch, right? We'll get like a closest number to, and we'll send some merch, and I don't know, maybe we'll send them something. But yeah, moving on to the one topic you want to discuss that you feel needs relevance and cleaning up within the industry.
I think honestly, the one topic is risk. I have been a huge proponent. I will go on at length about identity. But I think it's honestly, it's really risk, because identity rolls up into that, being able to identify who or what is touching what when. To me, I think the thing about the industry is we keep selling products. We keep selling the CNAPs, the CWAPs, the WAFs, there's a freaking TLA for everything, including TLAs. I think we need to step back and start looking at risk, right? What is a risky thing for my company? What can my company survive? And start applying our tool choices based on the risk, as opposed to simply, let's buy a whole bunch of good stuff and turn it on. Because MGM had a whole bunch of good stuff and they had it turned on and they got done in by not following process. And I think, when we look at it, there's this belief that we can use the systems to replace just doing the work. And this is a process I hear because I play hockey, right? And hockey players, you do the work. That's all you do. You just do the work. Doesn't matter how much skill you have. If you don't do the work, you're not getting anywhere, especially in the NHL. So we as security professionals need to start doing the work. And stop just buying the tools. A new hockey stick, a new pair of skates is not going to make you exponentially better. It might make you a little bit better, but only if you do the work, right? So I think the industry needs to look at themselves. We all need to look at ourselves and say, are we really doing the work? Are our people really doing the work? Because if you don't have processes and there's ways to not follow them, then you're not doing the work. You're doing the easy thing. You're buying the tool and implementing the tool and then reporting on all the metrics that the tool tells you. That isn't doing the work, right? So get in there, roll up your sleeves, do the work.
I like that. It's almost like we're kind of pushing so far toward technology that we assume systems, AI, and automation takes away the actual application of a process. And I think you're absolutely spot on that maybe half of our problems are simply because people either don't want to follow a process, they don't understand a process, or maybe it's just too cumbersome. And it's like, well, if you reduce that or maybe change it up, how many companies have you probably worked in and it's always been like that?
Yep.
And it's like, well, if you change this, it means this output or this outcome. And yeah, I think we're moving far too much into this kind of realm of assuming machines can do everything for us rather than...
Well, machines will do stuff for us, but if we don't do the work first, garbage in, garbage out, you're going to train an AI to be a dumbass. Like that. That's like, and don't get done by stupid, right? Like that's the problem. That is honestly the problem. Like we think these things think for us, and they don't. They simply do what we want them. We code them, we write the processes for them, and if you don't have the process, you're just teaching it to do dumb shit.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And then to conclude then, Bill, on the one thing in cyber you think is BS and needs a focus on or needs to change?
That systems will do shit for us. Like the thing that we've got to take a pause and start looking at process, right? Start looking internally hard at our process. And then when you've got your process, then you automate your process by using systems to automate that process. Think being lazy, right? I know it's contradictory, but think being lazy. If you do something repetitively, find a way to automate that thing and find a way to check that you're doing it correctly. And if you can find a way to check that you're doing it correctly, that you do automate the thing, you can then take that and roll it into an AI that will then predictively be able to do that thing when the thing needs to happen, right? That's the thing we have to do. And it just seems so simple. I think that's the problem. I think we overcomplicate things. We look at this as a massively complicated problem. And it's not. Make systems easy for people to use, take decisions away from them, and let me make sure I clarify why I say that. Every time you make a decision, you have a point of making the wrong decision. And we have been in security. I've been in security 30 years. I don't know shit. Like when it really comes down to it, I don't know everything. I only know what I know. And I'm going to make lots of mistakes. And yet we turn around to the accounting department or the HR department or the marketing department and expect them to be as good as us is insane. Security awareness is a generational thing. So we need to get out of this. I'm going to make you watch a video for 45 minutes at the end of the year. I need to gently course correct you throughout the year. That's what needs to happen. There need to be little tests. Like I love phishing tests. I love the little tests throughout the year, but more to the point, monitor them. And when they start to make what appears to be a wrong decision, you bring up something that says, hey, we think you're making a wrong decision. Here's why. Does this align with what the company's policy is or what you think is good behavior? And have them start to change those things, because that takes generations, right? How many generations into the internet are we? One? Like we have one generation coming up that's never not known the internet. So how do we expect this inherent thing that, when you settle America and you had these Wild West towns and laws were created, it took generations for them to figure out how that was supposed to work, right? And we're doing the same thing, accelerated, but the same thing. So it's not going to take 100 years, not going to take 50 years, but it's probably going to take a lot longer than the 20 or 15 that we've been at this.
It's oddly comforting to hear that, Bill. It's almost like the realization is kicked in for me, and I hope for other people. And, even like you'd mentioned, like that good behavioral element, that needs to be built rather than taking these assumptions. And I think a lot of our problems can be taken away just through common sense. But you're right,
yeah.
Why would you go to like a finance team or however it may be and expect them to be at the same level as a security practitioner? You need to talk common language, make things relatable. So then they're probably sitting at home and saying, I've seen this thing, or I've seen that, or my dad, my mum, or someone experienced a phishing, whatever it may be. So, and again, you'd mentioned like a 45-minute video, and I remember when GDPR was a thing. Well, it's still a thing, but when it came out, it was like, oh my God. I remember being on a Zoom call with someone and they tied a rope around their neck, like as a gimmick, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? They're like, this training is absolutely atrocious. It's like hours long, and it actually took the average person in the company 2 weeks to complete it.
It's like
2 weeks.
That's absolutely insane. Like if you put me in a finance department, I'm on a PIP in 2 weeks, I'm fired in 3, because that is not my business, right? And we're security professionals and we still can't get most of this stuff right. Yet we expect to train people into this. Like training people to be GDPR compliant, that's a law, right? You're either in jail or you're not. And that's actually a really interesting one when you think about it, because that if you go down the street and you see an open window of a car, you don't reach in and take something because there are consequences for it. But it's taken time for us to learn those things. That you don't go down the dark alley at 2:00 in the morning because the risk is too great. Might do it during the day when it's bright and sunny and there's people around, right? And that's a risk decision. That's really where we need to get to. We need to get to the point where somebody comes along and sees an open S3 bucket. They don't do anything. They might tell somebody and say, hey, I saw an open S3. I saw a car, it's sitting there and there's, $1,000 sitting on the seat. I didn't take it, but it's there. Or maybe they stand there and we have to get to that point where we police ourselves around mistakes made by others and bad behavior done, right? It takes a village, right? And I think unfortunately in society, we're into this, don't say anything about the neighbor's kids. No, I still do. Like a neighbor kid's acting up, I'm saying something to the kid, and then I'm saying something to the parents, right? And I think we need to have that in security, because that's how we mature as a society, as a whole, and as a netizen. Like we are digital citizens now, almost every one of us. There's, I think, very few that don't use digital services in some way, and even less, there's still a huge amount of us that live on the internet. Like we literally live here. And when you get the AR, VR stuff becoming commonplace, when that happens, there's going to be even more stuff, more life, more societies built. You're going to see the geopolitical borders are gone. Like, the Great Wall of China barely works. Like, it does some stuff, but you can still get through it. But you see these e-commerce that traverse geopolitical borders, and taxation is going to, like, there's all sorts of stuff that's going to happen. And I think we need to get people just a little bit more comfortable with that.
I think through this next evolution of like internet generation 2, I think is almost sounded like a plug for a browser, but it seems like through that kind of younger generation, maybe they will have that foresight to effectively recognize things and be transparent and open and talk about it, rather than this whatever we're in at the moment is just toxic. It's horrendous to deal with. And
dude, I literally deleted all the social apps. Well, not all of them. I keep Twitter and LinkedIn because of business, but I deleted everything else off my phone last week. I'm just so sick of it. It's just toxic. And set up a burner account. A little experiment. Go on Instagram or TikTok. Set up a burner. Don't do TikTok because that app is just nasty. But go on one of them. Set up a burner account. Don't like anything. Don't search for anything. Just take what it feeds you, and see what it looks like in 6 weeks. I guarantee you, it's going to be just monstrous amounts of porn.
Yeah, and also, again, depending on which region you're in, it's probably going to be driven by political items as well.
Yeah. Toxic, ultra right wing, ultra left wing, divisive sentimentality that will make you want to hate somebody, and it's just not worth it.
I know, and that's the business that big tech are in. The more we fight amongst each other, the more we hate, then the more profit they seem to make. But
more click-throughs on it, right? There's just more click-throughs on things that really sort of tweak you a little bit. So it's either the dopamine hit or the adrenaline hit, the fight or flight response. They're cluing in on something in there to make you click through on those things. And it's a time suck, right? Literally a time. Like, when you realize that you're sitting there watching the movie with your significant other in the living room that you plan to watch, and you look over and they're on a phone and you're on a phone and nobody's actually watching the movie. You're kind of listening to it. There's a freaking problem.
Yeah. And speaking of dopamine, if people could like, share, and subscribe, that would be great.
Hit the social networks for this. See if we can make it positive.
I know. Don't delete your socials. Keep them and share the Decloak podcast. But, obviously, jokes aside, it is true, it is harming towards society. And, I was actually setting up a new iPad earlier. And I was like, I don't even want half of this stuff from on my phone. And then I was like, back to your point, I'm like, I'm scrubbing stuff because it's just damaging. You're right. Like, if you were to sit, sorry.
I was going to say, you can get good stuff through it. Like, I have found some new music, interestingly enough, mostly British, but I found new music through Instagram. Like, there were some reels that would pop up. There's a guy named Ren out of Bristol. I think he's a genius. He's kind of crazy, but I think he's an absolute genius. This guy Prof I think he's out of like southern US somewhere. People I would never have heard of before, never listened to, but I got them on the reel. Same with comedians, but you have to wade through so much garbage to get to it. And I just wish the tech companies would let me control my algorithm so you'd stop sending me the garbage.
I think it would be in their best interest to do that, because then it's organic in terms of what they're actually getting, and they'll probably feed it into a giant machine, which will then create the matrix, and then
perfect.
We're gonna need Keanu to come back again for I don't even know how many Matrix movies are, like 9 or 10 or something. They're absolute dross, but the first one's the best though, and I'll conclude on that. But any final thoughts, Bill, before we wrap up?
Oh, no, I think I've said a lot. I do still believe that there's a positive aspect to this. We are in a wondrous time of change. I believe AI has the ability to touch everything. I don't know whether it makes it better or worse. We'll figure that part out, but it has the ability to touch anything. And some of these things that come through, like the Neuralink, where they're letting people control things that they couldn't using their mind. They're now saying that they've got a vision one that was approved by the FDA. There's brilliant work being done out there. And I think we need to start highlighting the brilliant stuff and stop highlighting all the garbage. And just get to being a society again.
I know, and be positive through
Yeah,
the change of technology, and rather than using it to weaponize political views or hate in the planet. But
exactly.
and anyway, well, Bill, thank you so much for your time. Again, we finally made it, and yeah, everyone, please show some love for Bill online. Follow, sub, whatever. I don't know if you've got any blogs or anything out there, Bill, as well, or anything that you want to plug. If you do, fire away.
You can always go over to craftventures.com if you're looking to join a portfolio company, like a startup. Our portfolio companies list all of their jobs there, and we are always helping hire into our portcos. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I am on LinkedIn. I did keep that one because that has some business aspect to it. It's getting weird too. They've got reels coming in now, which is kind of strange. And you can always get me at willharm3.com. That's my website.
Nice. Thanks again, Bill. And thanks, everyone.